And now we're heading off to England for your postdoc, you said.
For my postdoc, yes.
Despite the fact you thought you could not make money as a PhD, you decided to go get postdoc.
Well, no, actually, that was the way I supported myself, because at that time, the government was handing out fellowships right and left. Because you remember, in the early 60s, this was the time of the big expansion of biology, of science. We were learning huge amounts of information. You know, cellular biology, molecular biology were all booming. And it was really a very fruitful time. We learned about how the cells were made, how proteins were made, how all these different molecules were made, and it was very exciting. And of course, it was during this time in England. I had nothing to do with this, but it was when Watson and Crick and Watson discovered the DNA structure, the double helix of DNA. And that became part of what I began to do in England. I worked on RNA, which is another nucleic acid, in mice that had cancer. These were mice that had what's called ascites, and this is a cancer that fills up the peritoneum, and you can create this in mice. And so I was studying the DNA, comparing cancer mice with non-cancer mice, doing something called chromatography, in which you could take the DNA and it would, on absorbent paper, different types of DNA would move to different levels on the absorbent paper. This was a very common technique that was then being used. So I was sort of interested in what I was doing, but I was much more interested in London. I was outside of London in a town called Chalfont St. Giles, which was on the railroad. And at that time, I bought a Volkswagen, so I had a car I could drive. I always had a car, actually, ever since Berkeley. And but I bought a Volkswagen. I had this car. And I discovered the opera, I discovered ballet, I discovered all sorts of things.
Maybe it'd be a good time to talk about, is it around this period that you did your chateau journey?
Yeah.
Might be good to hear that story.
Well, one of the graduate students at Berkeley was named Ed Błaskawicz. Ed was from Rhode Island, from Polish parents, obviously. And Ed, when I met him, was already a wine connoisseur. He was a year ahead of me. His advisor at Berkeley was a very famous man called H.A. Barker, who was the father of fermentation. And Ed did his PhD on an aspect of fermentation. But obviously wine is made through fermentation. And one of the people that Ed discovered in California was a man named Martin Ray. And Martin Ray had a vineyard on top of a mountain called Mount Eaton, which was south of San Francisco. And I remember very clearly going to the vintage at Mount Eaton in one September. And if you've never been to a vintage, it's really quite an exciting time because, you know, people are picking the grapes, and we actually did smash the grapes with our feet in the vats. And
sounds like fun.
It was also there that I learned that Martin Ray, although married with children, was homosexual. And many of the workers were very attractive young men, and some of them propositioned me. Now, I didn't follow up on any of these, but it was quite an experience to be there in the heat and the wine.
This is in California still.
And in California, it was a very heady experience. Anyway, I moved to Colorado, as I mentioned. Ed stayed on, got his PhD with Barker, and then he went to Munich, and I went to outside of London. But we kept in touch via letters. You know, there was no email, and we arranged a trip in France in '62, the summer of '62, in which we had a car, and we drove from Paris, and we drove to many wine areas in France.
It's in your Volkswagen?
Yeah, I think it was in my Volkswagen, actually. I forget exactly. But much later, Franklin and I sort of replicated that trip. And what it involves is going from the airport north of Paris to the Marne River area, which is Champagne, where there is, many champagne making places. And there are the big houses, of course, the Mums and all of those different big ones that you know about. But there are many smaller ones too. But Ed and I went there to Champagne. We went to Chablis. I learned about Chablis. We went to Burgundy. You go Champagne and then down a little bit east of that to Chablis, and then further south to Burgundy, and then across France to Bordeaux. And one of the most interesting experiences that we had was outside of Bordeaux, the town of Bordeaux, at a vineyard called Chateau d'Yquem, which is the world's most famous Sauterne. Chateau d'Yquem is in an area called Sauterne, and in that area they make sweet white wines from the Semillon grape. And just last night with Nathaniel, we had some Chateau Rieussec, which is another Sauterne. But the the most famous Sauterne is Chateau d'Yquem, and Ed had written ahead and had letters of introduction to a number of vineyards, among them Chateau d'Yquem, and we were invited to lunch. And it was a fabulous lunch, about 5 courses, and the Baron Louis Selous, who at that time was the owner, sat at the head of the table explaining to us how his wine, this heavy sweet wine, was good with fish. But the fish we were eating was all in cream sauce and very rich, and it was good with dishes that were very rich.
Was it just the two of you, or was there a larger group?
There was a larger group. There was his son,